It's important to keep in mind, until Space Mountain, Disney rides were mostly about the vibes. Space Mountain wasn't just a ride, it was a challenge. And many guests said, challenge accepted. The story of Space Mountain begins in the early 1960s, a time when space exploration captivated the imagination of the entire world. And along with it, Walt Disney. Walt was always inspired by the cutting edge of technology and innovation. Walt watched in awe as astronauts blasted into space. Walt was struck by the blackout period during the re-entry. When the astronauts were safely recovered, their first words were often the same: boy, what a ride. And Walt Disney wanted to recreate that ride for everyone. And as always, Walt saw an opportunity. He thought, not everyone will get to experience space travel, but we can recreate something that simulates it. He envisioned an attraction that captured the thrill, danger, and wonder of space flight, while at the same time reassuring guests that they were safely in control. And the goal was to create an experience that would replicate the adrenaline rush of space travel. John Hinch, one of Walt's most trusted Imagineers, shared this same vision. Hinch believed the attraction needed to simulate a sense of challenge, something that felt like a real threat, creating a sense of accomplishment for those who braved the adventure. In 1965, Walt Disney tasked Imagineer John Hinch with the challenge of creating a space-themed attraction at Disneyland. Space Mountain was to be the centerpiece of the newly reimagined Tomorrowland 1967. To offer guests something far more thrilling than the pretty conceptual flight to the moon. However, the concept was shelved due to a lack of technology and wouldn't come back to life until the early 70s, but in an entirely different location. But Space Mountain was unlike anything Disneyland had ever attempted. Imagineer George McGinnis proposed a visible loop illuminated by strobe lights to showcase the thrill factor. However, this idea was considered way too extreme for a Disney family audience. To test the ride's limits, Disney turned to an unlikely critic, Edna Disney, Roy Disney's 83-year-old widow. She was flown down to Orlando and became one of the first to ride Space Mountain. Her verdict? She loved it. Edna's approval was the reassurance Disney needed, convincing them that the ride was thrilling without going too far. Or did it? Space Mountain officially opened in December of '74. By January of 1975, it was the crown jewel of Walt Disney World's biggest celebration since opening day. Thousands gathered to watch a parade of 2,000 musicians, but beneath its futuristic dome, Disney would face challenges that they had never faced before. For decades, Disney parks had built their reputation on safety and tranquility. Warning signs were always tastefully hidden. Disneyland's early attractions were meticulously designed. Immersive experiences that transported guests to other worlds without pushing any physical limits. The only prior roller coaster was the Matterhorn bobsleds, but Space Mountain required a completely different level of intensity. When Walt Disney World opened in 1971, guests believed Disney attractions were virtually risk-free. This perception made Space Mountain a shock to the system for many of its first passengers. Guests boarded expecting a slow, scenic journey, only to be met with sharp curves, sudden drops, and the thrill of feeling weightlessness. Hey friends, I hope you're enjoying today's epic adventures out at Walt Disney World, exploring the first year of Space Mountain, aka Crash Mountain. If you're enjoying today's video, do me and do you a favor, subscribe to Hey Bricky. That is the easiest way to keep going on these journeys with me, and it helps me grow the channel and keep on going out and exploring new theme parks, new adventures to bring home new stories. I'm so happy you showed up, and I'm even more happy you subscribed to Hey Bricky. Space Mountain was the world's first roller coaster to operate entirely in darkness, and the first to use computer-controlled systems. Two Nova 210 computers monitored the rockets, controlling their speed and spacing with precision. If anything went wrong, the system would halt and instantly prevent any accidents. This technology was groundbreaking, but also daunting. Many ride operators struggled to understand the sophisticated systems, making Space Mountain as much of a leap in operational complexity as it was in guest experience. For Magic Kingdom guests, the ride was an unknown entity. At a top speed of just 28 miles per hour, Space Mountain wasn't designed to be fast, but its sharp curves and sudden drops and smooth track created a sensation of speed and weightlessness. Astronauts Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, and Jim Irwin, who were among the first to ride, praised the realism and excitement. However, many paying guests found themselves caught off guard, expecting a slow-moving space tour. They were unprepared for the physical demands of the ride. While it was a technological marvel, The ride's immersive darkness and unexpected intensity caused confusion and injuries for many of its first riders. To maintain the illusion of space travel, Disney instructed its cast members to never refer to Space Mountain as a roller coaster. Early warning signs were minimal, with no explicit mention of the ride's physical demands. Many of the early guests boarded expected a gentle journey through outer space, similar to other Disney's attractions. I mean, this place was known for vibes, not thrills. But instead, they were surprised as they were lifted out of their seats. But the results of the original version of Space Mountain were sometimes catastrophic. By the end of its first year, 330 guests reported illnesses and injuries after riding Space Mountain. Some first guests suffered minor scrapes, nausea, or dizziness, while others experienced more severe outcomes, such as broken bones, ruptured spinal disc, and in one case, a 67-year-old woman boarded the ride. She thought she was going to go through a bunch of different space vignettes and something similar to Peter Pan. But instead, the unexpected twists and turns and drops fractured this poor lady's spine. Disney often addressed these incidents quietly. The company typically paid medical bills in exchange for signed agreements preventing lawsuits. But when claims did make it to court, Disney aggressively pursued settlements to avoid negative publicity. One woman who suffered a spinal fracture received $40,000, while another fractured tailbone was awarded $2,500. Even Disney's own insurance adjuster couldn't escape Space Mountain. In March of '77, the adjuster rode the ride 5 times, each time sitting in a different seat. By the end of the day, he had tweaked his back. Further evidence of the ride's potential to injure even the most prepared riders. Then, in a disastrous incident just 5 weeks after the attraction's opening, a computer failure allowed multiple rockets to collide. As one train slowed down to unload passengers, the system failed to halt the rockets behind it. One after another, rockets plowed into the stationary train. In total, 41 passengers were injured in the collision, ranging from minor bruises to more serious injuries. The ride was closed for 8 days while engineers worked to address the issue and prevent similar accidents in the future. And many of these problems highlighted a larger issue. Guests simply didn't know what they were getting into. Space Mountain's dark environment made it impossible for riders to anticipate or brace future turns and drops. Despite these injuries, Disney remained committed to improving Space Mountain. The rockets were redesigned with higher seat backs, thicker padding inside handrails, and new seat belts to improve passenger stability. Warning signs were updated to be more explicit, and cast members were trained to spot potentially at-risk guests in line. Yet even with these measures, the ride's intensity continued to push the limits. Space Mountain's groundbreaking design had redefined the Disney experience, but it also revealed the challenges of merging innovation with safety. Oh, hey, what's up, friend? Looking for a stylish way to represent your fandom when you hit the park? Head over to heybricky.com, link below. Grab yourself a Walt 1901 hoodie, or maybe the 1955 Undefeated Champs baseball cap. I'm so happy you showed up, and I'm happy you decided to support Hey Bricky and look good in the process. Space Mountain's revolutionary design was both its greatest strength and its most significant challenge. Within 2 weeks of Space Mountain's opening, the company began taking steps to better manage guest expectations. Audio announcements in the queue warned riders that the attraction was a thrill ride with high-speed turbulence. By February of 1975, the phrase roller coaster was added to signs and audio narrations, breaking the earlier policy of avoiding the term altogether. Cast members were also permitted to use the phrase when describing the ride to guests, marking a significant shift in Disney's approach to communicating the risk. But as always, words alone weren't enough to prevent confusion. To reinforce the message, Disney introduced physical reminders. A rocket carrying life-size astronaut dummies was mounted outside of the attraction to visually signal the ride's intensity. Inside, Gordon Cooper, a real-life Mercury astronaut, recorded a low-key video that was played in the queue. He described the ride as really exciting, super fast, and a real thrill, gently suggesting anyone with health concerns might want to take the exit ramp instead. And operators privately refer to this as the chicken ramp. And I've been known to cross a chicken ramp or two in my day. Disney's response was swift and thorough. Warnings were added specifically targeting guests with back problems, heart conditions, pregnancy, and other health issues. And cast members were trained to spot potentially at-risk guests standing in line. Operators began actively patrolling the queue to identify anyone who might struggle with the ride's intensity, offering a quiet suggestion to try a different attraction, which they would never ever legally be allowed to do that today. For international guests, multilingual audio warnings were recorded to ensure the message reached as many visitors as possible. Television cameras were installed inside the ride to detect potential issues, giving operators an extra layer of oversight. Ride operators were trained to immediately hit the emergency stop button if a rocket returned to the station with an empty seat, just in case a guest had been ejected mid-ride. And sadly, in an incident shortly after the modifications, a 70-year-old man suffered a fatal heart attack while riding. This tragedy prompted further warnings, now cautioning guests with heart problems to avoid the attraction altogether. So nearly all of the things that you see when you go through the queue today, the little peekaboos over to people getting on the attraction, the TVs, the warnings that you hear, all of this was put in reaction to the first couple of years when guests had no expectations for Space Mountain, and as of the results, sometimes people that weren't equipped to ride a ride this thrilling were getting on board, which was not a good vibe. So everything that you see when you go through the queue, those are all additions to manage your expectations. In April of 1975, Disney began modifying the ride itself. Engineers adjusted the sharpest turns on the track, replacing them with smoother, feathered curves to reduce G-force and to minimize strain on riders' bodies. So if you've been thinking to yourself this entire time, bro, this ride isn't that rough, let me say to you, bro, you never rode this version of the ride. Yet despite all these adjustments, Space Mountain never lost its edge. I'd like to give a special shout out to a book called Reality Land: The True Adventures at Walt Disney World. It was written by one of my favorite authors, David Cohen, who makes amazing books about the history of Disney, Disneyland, and Walt Disney World. His chapter 8, Crash Mountain, inspired today's video, and without his research, it wouldn't be possible. Thank you so much, David, for what you do, and I highly recommend buying one of his books because I own all of them. His books are available on Kindle or hardback, and I own both. And this is not an ad, it's just a shout out and a thank you to David for doing what he does. Research like guys from David have helped me in this channel tremendously. Friends, if you want to see a video that shows what Disney was doing before Space Mountain came along, make sure you watch this video that shows you all of the design tricks that went into creating Matterhorn, Disney's first ever mountain. Thank you so much for watching.